Welcome to the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show with Corey and Justin. Here they are, the Fourth and Long Fantasy Brothers.
Welcome to episode 3 of the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show. My name is Corey, and I am here with my actual brother, Justin.
Hello, this is Justin.
Episode 3, here we come. Justin, how are you?
Man, I'm good. I'm really good. I've evolved a bit. As you can probably tell, my audio quality has gotten far better from episode 1 and 2. But I think really I should ask you, man. Big weekend, birthday coming up on Monday. How you feeling?
I'm excited losing my youth slowly but surely. But I do have to say, you sound great. I mean, you've never sounded better, and just in time for episode 3. I love it.
I'm really growing.
Yeah, I could tell you are evolving as a fantasy analyst, and that is an exciting thing for the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show. All right, so here we go with episode 3.
On today's show,
next up, we have our wide receiver and tight end rankings. We'll be going through Justin's remaining ranks for the 2020 fantasy season, following last week's review of the quarterbacks and the running backs. Justin, we're going to hit on tight end first and get that shallower position out of the way and then dive into wide receivers. That sound good?
Sounds fantastic.
Very good. So without further delay, let's get to it.
let's talk rankings.
As I said, we'll start with the tight end, and that elite class of tight ends is shrinking in my mind. Justin, are you with me or against me on that? You have Travis Kelce at 1 and George Kittle at 2. Is that the elite class, or does that term of elite fade down into Andrews and Ertz in your mind, who you have at 3 and 4?
I'm with you. Don't get me wrong. I like Andrews and Ertz, but I think Kelce and Kittle are really the alphas here. They are the elite of the elite in terms of the tight end position. Now, I'm typically against the new fad, which we talked about in episode 1, which is the elite tight end early strategy. But it really depends. I don't think that I'll have Kelce and Kittle on my squad. They're going a little too high for me, but both were familiarity scale winners. Now, Kelce is the number 1 in my mind. He had 97 receptions last year, and he now holds 2 of the top 10 all-time seasons in terms of receptions by a tight end. And the only other player who can say that is Tony Gonzalez. That's damn good company in my mind. And we can't forget he's got Patrick Mahomes as his quarterback. That really keeps Kelce in as my number 1. Now, Kittle is no slouch. Don't get me wrong. He had a 79.4% catch rate last year, which was the 3rd highest mark of all time for tight ends who have seen at least 50 targets. The dude is just a beast, and he's a special tight end. I love them both. They're both going around that 18 to 20 overall range right now. So they're late seconds, second rounders, early third rounders, and I think deservedly so. Now, Corey, I know you're a Kittle guy. Is he your 1, or are you taking Kelce over Kittle?
Yeah, I am. Kittle is my 1 and Kelce is my 2, and we'll be getting into my rankings in a future show, but little spoiler alert there. Kittle is my number 1 and Kelce is my 2. Now, I'll just go through my reasoning up for that quickly. Kittle, in my mind, has a positive touchdown trend in his future, and you know I'm a huge Kittle fan, and I owned him a lot last year. So with that being the case, I watched a lot of 49ers games, and there were so many games where Kittle would catch the ball and get within the 5 to 10 yard line, and then they would run, and then they would throw to Deebo Samuel, and then there would be other plays in mind where Kittle just gets double covered in the red zone or whatever it might be. So I like the thought that all those plays that Kittle had, he's going to be able to break this year, and I truly think that he has that positive touchdown trend in his favor because he had so many occasions last year where it got called back on a penalty, or he had a big play and he just couldn't get into the end zone. Now, along with Kelce, look, I like Kelce, but he did look like a little bit of a lesser version of himself last year. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying he's bad, nor did he look bad. I just feel like we're on the other side of the curve with him. Justin, do you think I'm off here? Like, am I too critical on Kelce and too in love with Kittle in this?
I don't think you are at all. I think the comparison here that I want to make is the comparison I made last week with Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. You really can't go wrong with either of them. I'd be incredibly happy to have either Kelce or Kittle.
So after Ertz, we have Evan Engram at 5 and Darren Waller at 6. In my mind, they might be a leg below the guys above them and a leg above the guys below them, if that makes any sense. Justin, your thoughts on these two?
I agree completely. I think these two offer really the most consistency before you get into the next group of tight ends here. The tight end landscape does tend to get a bit uncertain after these guys. I won't say ugly, because I think there are some pretty good values you can get late at the tight end position, but it certainly starts to get a little bit more uncertain after you pass by Evan Engram and Darren Waller. Now, Engram, you look at him, and Engram plays more of that slot tight end role. He really needs to stay healthy this year. He missed 8 games last year. Daniel Jones should take a step forward this coming year. I think he's a solid quarterback who can sustain a couple fantasy relevant players on his team. And don't forget, I mean, we got Jason Garrett coming into New York as the offensive coordinator, and we saw how he used Jason Witten in Dallas in his tenure. So I think Engram could be a really solid tight end to target this year. Now, Waller, he's the only tight end who totaled at least 7 PPR points in all 16 games last year. He had the 4th best tight end season for a fantasy player of any Oakland tight end. 4th best of all time. That's pretty good. He was just so consistent when it comes to scoring week over week. And I think with tight ends, that's really important.
Let's wrap on tight end pretty quickly here so we can jump over to wide receiver. Justin has Hunter Henry at 7, Jared Cook at 8, Tyler Higbee at 9, Hayden Hurst at 10, TJ Hockensen at 11, Jack Doyle at 12, and rounding out the top 15 is Rob Gronkowski, Dallas Goedert, and Austin Hooper. Justin, wow, I have a lot to say about all of these. You have Austin Hooper's replacement, well above Austin Hooper himself. You have Goedert, who's the second tight end on his own team for half the league's starting tight ends. And in the middle, you have the unproven Hayden Hurst and TJ Hockensons of the world. And look, I'm not criticizing here. I just think this position is an absolute mess. Who do you like in this group, and who are you worried about?
So I think the guy that I like the most in this group here is Jack Doyle. Now, I'm not afraid of Trey Burton at all. And Doyle is really, in my mind, a complete tight end. He can run block, he runs good routes, and he has really, really solid hands for a tight end. Now we can't forget that Phillip Rivers is coming into Indy this year. Ebron's on his way out. I think Doyle will really be the safety blanket for Phil this year. If I'm waiting on tight end, I'm definitely looking at Jack Doyle super late. Now, in terms of who I dislike in this group, I'm going to go against probably the consensus here and say I'm not a big fan of Rob Gronkowski this year. The former 24/7 WWE champion, right? In my mind, there's just so much variance in what Gronk could possibly do. He could either dominate or he barely sees the field and finishes outside the top 15. And we can't forget that, the Bucs still have Cameron Brate and OJ Howard in the fold. A lot of mouths to feed. I think his name recognition alone will drive up his ADP. Now, Corey, I'm kind of curious, what's your tight end strategy as we approach a draft season? Are you looking for the elite guy early, or are you waiting for value later?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, at a certain point in the wide receiver and running back group, I really do start to feel gross. I mean, I got to be honest, right? You're saying right now they're second rounders, but if Kelce and Kittle are there in the 4th or 5th round and they fall in a draft and it's either them or the likes of some underwhelming fantasy options, you're going to see me take the jump. I'll take a tight end that I can rest easy with over stressing because of, streaming tight ends throughout the season.
Yeah, I'm totally on the late tight end train this season. I don't think I'm even going to be looking at guys like Kelce and Kittle and Ertz and Andrews. I think they'll be going too high for my blood. And give me all the Jack Doyles, TJ Hockensons, and Will Disleys I can handle. I'll take them all.
Then let me ask you, at what point do you feel that Kittle and Kelce become someone who you can no longer avoid? What round?
I think it's probably the 3rd or 4th. I'd probably dip my toes in if Kelce was there. Let's say I was picking, if I had the number 1 or number 2 overall pick and I could pair a Christian McCaffrey or a Zeke Elliott with another top running back and then grab Kittle or Kelce in the 3rd, I'd feel pretty comfortable with that at that point.
Got it. So we're basically on the same page. I'm just of the mind that I feel like in drafts, when you're in a live person draft, people are really reluctant to go on those tight ends. So I'm of the feeling that either Kelce or Kittle's going to fall. You just are pretty much of the mind, by the time the 3rd round comes around, those guys are going to be gone. Is that what you're saying?
I think they'll be gone by the time that comes around. Yep.
Okay, that's fair. All right, well, here we go. It's time. Let's do it. Wide receiver time. Probably the most controversial group to rank this year, as it is most years. Justin, your top 5 starts with Michael Thomas, Tyreek Hill, Davante Adams, Julio Jones, and Deandre Hopkins. Is this tier 1? Is Michael Thomas tier 1 all by himself? Who's got you excited in this group?
Yeah, so if I'm playing in PPR, Thomas is definitely in his own tier. I think he's the clear 1. Now, if I'm playing standard, Thomas is still my 1, but he's not necessarily the clear 1 like he is in a PPR format. Now Thomas himself is excellent. He's great. He had 149 receptions this past season, which was the most by any player in NFL history. He had 374.6 PPR fantasy points, which were almost 100 more points than the second best fantasy wide receiver, Chris Godwin. Talk about a leg up, right? I mean, the guy is like Christian McCaffrey at the running back position. He offers a weekly advantage at the wide receiver slot. I'm buying in on Michael Thomas as the number one without a doubt. Now the guy I like the most in this group of 4 or 5 here is Tyreek. In my mind, he's a lock to be top 5. Interesting thing that I read this offseason is that he adopted yoga in his offseason programs. He's come out and said that he feels better. He feels more nimble. And he feels like he's getting in and out of his routes a lot better than last year, which, I mean, if he's feeling better, I'm feeling better about him too. And we can't forget he's got Mahomes as his quarterback going back to Kelce. I just think that's a leg up on the competition. Now, these wide receivers in this tier are very similar to my top 4 at running back. I'd be really happy to get any of them. Now, Corey, I know we're both Tyreek Hill lovers. We're big fanboys of Tyreek Hill. I mean, you think over, under 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I don't love predicting stats. You know me. It's not in my nature because of the inconsistency of the game of football. But is that a possible outcome? Of course. I'll take the over. Look, the fact is I love the talent. There is no other wide receiver like Hill. He's the perfect mix of route running and catchability, all mixed into the fastest guy in football. And he has the best quarterback in the league throwing in the ball. So check, and check. Now, Justin, we have a very appealing group of wide receivers below the top 5. All guys who wouldn't shock me if they finished top 5 at the position this year. It's Mike Evans at 6, Kenny Golladay at 7, Chris Godwin at 8, OBJ at 9, Amari Cooper at 10, Juju Smith-Schuster at 11, and Cooper Kupp at 12. In 12-team leagues, Justin, these are your wide receiver ones. Give me one guy from this group you'd be thrilled to have as a third-round wide receiver 1 after going running back, and one guy you might feel queasy with.
The guy that I'm hyping in this group is definitely Mike Evans. I think some of the experts are a bit down on Evans this year, and I just really don't get it, right? I mean, I have him at 6. Most experts have him around 8, 9. I've even seen some guys fading him outside of the top 10. I mean, talk about consistency with Mike Evans. He's had 1,000+ yards in 6 straight seasons. Now, I'm not denying it. The highs are high with Evans. He put up a couple duds last year, but he had 3 games with 30+ points last year. So he single-handedly won you weeks last year. I'll own a lot of Mike Evans this year at his current price. Now, the guy I'm a bit queasy on in this group in the top 12 is probably Cooper Kupp. He's this high because of his TD upside, and I'd love to have him. He was one of 2 wide receivers last year to score 10 touchdowns. He's the touchdown guy in LA with the Rams. But one of the things we can't do is we can't ignore the shift in LA's offensive scheme towards the end of the year last year. Higbee took a step forward. Cooks is gone now. But I don't know if I'd like Kupp necessarily as my wide receiver 1. He's definitely more of a desirable high-end wide receiver 2 target in my mind.
At 13 is Adam Thielen. Justin, let's talk Thielen. Diggs is gone. Thielen's the man in Minnesota, or so we would think. Is there something you're not feeling about him to keep him out of that top 12?
Listen, I like Adam Thielen. He's got a serious bro connection with Cousins, which I think is one of the main reasons why Diggs is in Buffalo right now. But I think we've started to see the end for Thielen. He topped 100 yards in his first 8 games of 2018 and averaged over 25 fantasy points per game in that span. You probably remember that crazy run of 8 straight games where he was just lighting the league on fire in 2018. He was really unstoppable. But since then, he has only topped 100 yards twice in 18 games, and he's averaged 12.21, to be exact, fantasy points. It's a run-first offense. I like him, but I don't love him this year.
At 14, we have DJ Moore, 15, Allen Robinson, 16, Courtland Sutton, 17, Tyler Lockett, 18, Stephon Diggs. Justin, a ton of talent over these next 5 guys. Can any of them realistically become a wide receiver 1 next year? Let's say there will be a Kenny Golladay in this group that goes from a high-end wide receiver 2 to a confident wide receiver 1. Which one of these guys makes the jump?
Yeah, it's Diggs for me. I think the expert consensus right now on him is about 25, 26. I have him at 18. Listen, the guy's had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. He is an elite route runner, one of the best in the NFL. He became just the 9th wide receiver over the last 10 years to finish as a top 24 receiver with less than 95 targets. And he racked up 635 yards and 6 touchdowns on 29 deep targets. And when I say deep targets, I mean targets that were 20-plus air yards thrown down the field. With a new team, with Josh Allen, who likes to throw it out, air it out, he's the unquestioned number one. I think he's destined to be a top 12 wide receiver this year. Now, Corey, I'm curious, who's your Golladay? Is he in this group?
Yes, he is, and it's Cortland Sutton. I mean, take a look at the highlights from last season. He's just all of it. He's just beating double coverage. He has that A.J. Green, Kenny Golladay jump in the air and beat the other guy type talent. I'm really optimistic of what he can become. So, Justin, things are already murky, so let's get murkier.
Let's do it.
A.J. Brown at 19, T.Y. Hilton at 20, Robert Woods at 21, Keenan Allen at 22, and Devontae Parker, Brandon Cooks, and Calvin Ridley at 23, 24, and 25. Justin, give me the Mark Ingrams and the Devin Singletaries that will be going at around the same time as these guys. Can you really feel good about any of them?
In this group, there are a couple guys that I like. Woods, Cooks, and Ridley are those three in this group. Now, for Woods, he's really Mr. Reliable. He's so incredibly consistent. There's no more Cooks in the fold. And from weeks 9 through 17, we talked about that shift in the LA Rams' sort of offensive philosophy or scheme. He averaged over 11 targets per game when he was on the field from weeks 9 through 17. I like Woods a lot this year. Now, Cooks, I am very high on Brandon Cooks in regards to the comparison against the market. I'll own a lot of Cooks this year because of that. I like the opportunity with Deshaun Watson. Now, Calvin Ridley, since 2014, Dirk Cutter, who's the offensive coordinator for the Falcons, has averaged 610 passing attempts a year. Now, when you look around the NFL over that same time frame, you'll realize that's a really significant trend towards the passing game as opposed to the rest of the league. And Cutter's offenses have really been kind of a gold mine for fantasy over the last 5 or 6 years. In 2018, Ridley averaged 5.8 targets per game with both Julio and Sanu in the fold. But in 2019, he saw a pretty good increase to an average of just over 7 targets a game, which would have equated to, give or take, right around 115 targets if he had played all 16 games. Calvin Ridley was one of my late round guys that I'm liking this year. I think he's got a lot of upward mobility.
Without fail, we have DK Metcalf, Terry McLaurin, and Hollywood Brown going 26, 27, and 28. 3 second-year wideouts looking for a big year, too. You've said you like Hollywood this year. What puts DK and McLaurin above him?
So AJ, DK, and Hollywood were really my top 3 last year in terms of rookie wide receivers. I could see any of these 3 guys vaulting into the top 20, maybe even the top 15 at this time next year. Now, DK and Terry, they had really solid seasons last year. I think those are the 2 guys that I like in this tier the most. Even though I do have a kind of a crush on Hollywood Brown, but I think the opportunity's there. Terry should be the unquestioned number 1 for Washington this year. Now, DK, the guy had 100 targets as a rookie. He had only 58 catches. He needs to work on those hands. I did read that he was working with Richard Sherman and Josh Gordon this offseason. And if he can jump up into that 65 to 70% catch rate, he'll be a top 15 wideout without a doubt. Now, if I was starting a team today and had to pick one of these 3 young wide receivers to build my wide receiver room around, don't get me wrong, I like Hollywood, but I think I'd lean towards DK. He's got that kind of prototypical number 1 size. Corey, if you had to pick one of these 3 guys to build your wide receiver core around, who would you take?
Look, DK may have the size and Terry may have the situation, but the most talented man in the group is Hollywood Brown, in my opinion. He just isn't in the best of situations, and we know that. However, I'm not going to let that stop me. The Ravens threw to their wideouts a historically low amount of times in 2019. Even if that changes just a little bit, you have to imagine he's a good play. But just know, for now, he is a spot fantasy player, a lot like a spot wrestler. And I'm going to take you back to the days when you used to watch wrestling, and we used to watch a guy named Evan Airborne, if you will. And he was a guy who was known as being a spot wrestler. He'd do something where he'd jump off a ladder. He would do something where he'd go flying through a table. He'd do some triple backflip. And that's what Hollywood is. At a certain week, and you have no idea what that week is going to be, he's going to give you 25 plus fantasy points, and you're going to love it. The problem is there's going to be a lot of murkiness in between that. It's kind of like that Deshaun Jackson type of feel. I like him. I love the talent. I'm hopeful for his future, and I think I would take him. Now, we have DJ Chark and Jarvis Landry to finish out your top 30, Justin. I'm scared of both these guys for this year. All right, Jacksonville can't seem to settle on a wide receiver one for about 10 years now. And yeah, that includes going back to the Cecil Shorts days for all those Cecil Shorts diehards out there. Meanwhile, Jarvis may have had his last big blow-up year in a surprisingly productive 2019. Justin, you're at a point in the draft where these two are left. You're looking at that last receiver in your starting lineup. Are you going Chark in this situation like your ranks say?
Dude, shout out to Cecil Shorts, right? 2012, the dude had 980 yards and 7 touchdowns in 14 games, and he only started 9 of those 14 games. Man, we were big Cecil Shorts fans back in the day. I think if I'm leaning between the two of these guys here, I'm probably leaning a bit more towards Chark for sure. The defense should not be all that great in Jacksonville this year. The Jags are not a very well-run team. I think it's just pure and simple that Chark is the clear number one in Jacksonville. Gruden's been talking him up like crazy this offseason. You know, Landry's playing with OBJ, and Stefanski's in as the head coach in Cleveland, and he's historically run a very conservative run-heavy scheme in his previous tenure. So I think if I'm looking at these two guys, Chark and Landry, I'd lean Chark.
All right, that'll do it for show number 3. Justin's complete wide receiver and tight end rankings are in the show description on YouTube. Next week, it's time for Justin to tear apart my rankings, and we'll also dive into some offenses we want to invest in. Remember to subscribe, download, follow, like, comment. Make sure you ring that bell on YouTube to get notifications. Whatever you have to do to show some support. I'm Corey.
And I'm Justin.
And this has been the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show. See you next time.
Royalty-free music courtesy of Ben Sound. The views and opinions expressed on today's episode are that of the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show. Remember to like and subscribe.